Good evening.
Good evening, brother.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Sure, thank you. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to move to above. Yeah, so it says here in the tour, ונוטל ידיו לצורך טיבול הראשון דכל אשר טיבולו במשקה צריך נטילה. So the next step, right after what we just discussed last night, is now we go to washing the hands. And why are we washing our hands here? Not because we're eating matzah, that's going to be later. Now we're going to eat the karpas, right, which is the celery. So since we're dipping it in the vinegar or salt water, so the rule is you have to wash your hands for that. But we do it without a blessing, So we go up, we wash our hands, no blessing. Why no blessing? Because not everybody agrees that you need to bless, that you need to wash your hands for this kind of a food. So therefore, we don't bless on it. And so we just basically wash and then come and eat the karpas. Good. So the Bet Yosef says, so he says this was already explained in a different chapter, 158, which talks about the issue of eating fruits and vegetables that are dipped into liquids, that you have to wash your hands. The truth is, that there is a misconception about this in people's minds. There are some people who think that you have to wash your hands every time you eat like a wet fruit or vegetable, and that's not really the case. The reason we're washing our hands here is because it's the way to dip that vegetable into some kind of a dip. So if it's the way to dip it like that, then you have to wash your hands. But if it's not the way to dip this kind of fruit or vegetable, so therefore there's no reason to wash your hands. So therefore, let's say you're eating, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're eating a fruit, grapes, I don't know, apples, pears, whatever. And, they're wet. So you don't have to wash your hands when you eat those. Even though they're wet, because it's not the way to dip them into a dip. So therefore, there's no reason to wash your hands there. A lot of people don't know this. So they waste their time, washing the hands and stuff like this. There's no reason for that. Some people also, what they do is they, before they eat the fruit, they dry it, like with a handkerchief or a towel or something. So it shouldn't be wet. There's no reason for that either. So you can just eat it as is. There's no. It's only something which is, it's the way to dip that vegetable or fruit, whatever. Then you have to wash your hands. And when it comes to fruits that we eat, summer fruits and things like this, it's not the way to dip, put them into a dip. So there's no reason to wash your hands there. Okay, good to know that. So that's a basic halacha. So here we do wash the hands because it is the way to dip, the karpas into a dip. As we said, right? What's the dip here? The dip is either vinegar or salt water, one or the other. So that's the story. Okay, so now we're going to go to next piece here. This one. So it says here in the Bet Yosef, מה שכתב רבנו על דברי רבנו מאיר ובעל העיטור. So that which the two wrote regarding these two rabbis, ולא נהרה, and he says, right, that the two writes that doesn't make sense what they said, these rabbis. So I guess we should go and read it first before we go on to this. We need to know the content there. So let's see what we can find. Yeah, so the Torah says like this. So he says, right, you have to, as we said, wash your hands over here because we're dipping the celery into the liquid. So he says the rule is that whatever is the way to dip it into some kind of a dip, some kind of liquid, it needs to be, you have to wash your hands. So he says over here, right? Kiddush. So he says, right, that you bless netilat yadayim. As we said, right, we don't bless because there's different opinions about this, so we don't bless. But he says over here you should. Interesting. Anyway, so then he reminds you one more thing here. We don't wash your hands before kiddush. Because you don't have to wash your hands when you're making kiddush. There's no reason for that. But he says whoever is accustomed, to wash his hands before making kiddush all year round, right? And right. So the kiddush is not like interruption. So you know what he's talking about here? What he's saying is like this: that there are some people who wash their hands before kiddush, and that is for the purpose of eating the bread afterwards. So they wash their hands before the kiddush. Our custom is to wash the hands after the kiddush, right? Before we eat the bread. I'm talking about Shabbat, right? So he says, right, that if your custom is like that, to wash before the kiddush, some people do that, even though most of us don't. And nowadays, most of us don't do it. So anyway, so he says, so he says here also, he says he could do that. So what does that mean? Let him wash his hands before the kiddush. If he does that all year round, So he can continue his custom over here. That's what he's saying. Interesting. Rabbeinu Meir Mirotenburg Katav. Okay, so I guess we should
I
go
guess
on.
if you want to be,
Let's go on to the Bet Yosef. So says Bet Yosef regarding this. Yeah, we have to go on more in the tour. We didn't finish it yet. So it says here in the tour. Then he says like this. Rabbeinu Meir Mirotenburg Katav Shahidna. So this rabbi says that nowadays, enot tzarich netilah davar shetibulo b'mashkeh. Right. So as we said, right, this is an opinion that says you don't need to wash your hands for something which is dipped into the liquid. So therefore, he wouldn't bless, right? So that's exactly what I just told you, right? A couple of minutes ago, that there's a machloket about this. So therefore, we don't bless, because according to this opinion, you don't really need this. So Tur says, right, I don't agree with them, with this. That's what the Geonim says. He also wrote that you do have to bless. So you see, right, we have different opinions here about this. If you have to bless or not. So it says, right, the Torah, if you want to remove yourself from the doubt over here, there is a doubt. So it says, do something which is going to force you to wash your hands. So this way it'll be like an obligation. So meaning what? He's telling you, right, do something which makes your hands dirty, that you have to now, right, wash your hands. Makes your hands unclean, whatever. Okay. You're going, for instance, right, let's say, what's an example of that? That he should go to the bathroom, right? And then he has to wash his hands because of that. So then, right, let him dry his hands, and then, right, take a vegetable and bless. Borei Pri Adama, right? Borei Pri Adama. Umtabel kedei lasot shinui b'shvil hatinokot. So the question is like this, right? Why do we dip the celery into the liquid? What's the reason why we do that? So he says the reason is because we want the children to ask questions, like, oh, what's the difference between this night and all the other nights, So this is also another question, which is, what's this business, that we're dipping, the our celery into the salt water, right, whatever, the vinegar, right? What's his business? Why is tonight different than all the other nights? Manishtana halayla hazeh. Right, that's the idea. But he says the rest of the year we don't do that, right? So it's something different. So, right, he says that you don't have to eat a kazait of the celery. In fact, right, we're going to see that the custom is to eat less than a kazait, right? Just we don't want to eat a kazait. What's the reason, by the way, we don't want to eat a kazait? Because then there's a question if you have to make a final blessing on that, right? Bracha achrona. So therefore, in order to avoid this getting into this doubt, what we do is we eat less than a kazait. So therefore, what should you do when you give people, right, their celery stalks, to eat? Make sure that they're like very small pieces, tiny ones. So this way, there's no question about making a blessing afterwards or not. Okay. Rav Amram, so he says, right, Rav Amram, interesting. What do we dip he says, what do we dip the celery into? We dip into charoset, he says. Interesting. We don't do that, right? That's not our custom. Rambam also says this. Interesting. Wow. Rabbeinu Tam Piresh shemitabel bechometz, right? So we do like this, right? Like Rabbeinu Tam, who says here that we dip it into vinegar, right? Velo becharoset and not charoset. Lefi shecharoset mitzvata ima maror. Why is that? Because the mitzvah is to eat charoset with the maror, so make sure you got everything in the right order, the right perspective over here. Then lechol mimenu kodem mitzvato. So he says, therefore, since the mitzvah is to eat it with the maror, you shouldn't eat it beforehand, right? It's not proper to do that. That's what he says. Rabbeinu Tam. V'chen haya noheg Adoni Avi Rosh. So he says the Rosh also had this custom, right, to do like that. V'afilu en lo sha'ar yirakot, even if he doesn't have other vegetables, shegam tibulo rishon bechazeret. So he says, nevertheless, right? Even if you're dipping, let's say you don't have any other vegetables, you don't have anything to use for karpas. So then, what are you going to do? You're going to use the romaine lettuce, right, for that purpose. So he says, nevertheless, we don't dip it into the charoset because we're doing now the mitzvah of karpas. We're not doing the mitzvah of maror. So, okay, interesting. Good. So he says, why? Why is that? Because the main mitzvah of eating the maror is not now, right? We're doing as we said. Right? So according to Ri, as we said, after you dip it into the and eat it, right, the celery, you should also bless a final blessing, right? Borei nefashot. According to Rashbam, as we said, right, you don't have to do it. So what does it mean? We said that it's a machloket, right? Therefore, we don't make a final blessing. And that's why we don't want to, again, right? We don't want to eat the kazait because then we're getting into a doubt whether you need the final blessing or not. Right? The Rosh agrees with the Rashbam, so it's a machloket, right, regarding that. So that's why we try to avoid that. Okay, good. So now we're going to the Bet Yosef. No more excuses. Here we go. All right, so says the Bet Yosef regarding this, right? En devarav nechonim. So he says the words of the Torah are not correct. What does that mean? That we said, right, that the Torah holds that you should bless on the karpas. So Maran Bet Yosef says it's not correct. We should not bless. So says Maran that since it's a machloket, right, we should avoid blessing. The rule is that when there's a machloket, we don't bless. So therefore, right, says the Bet Yosef, better not to bless. That's the proper thing to do. And that was the Torah said that if you want to have no doubts, then do something which makes your hands unclean, and then you have to wash for and bless. So this is according to the opinions which were written in chapter 7 in the Torah, right? We already passed that, by the way. We did that a while ago when we started learning the Bet Yosef and the Torah. So what does that mean? There is an opinion that after you go to the bathroom, you have to also bless netilat yadayim. But according to Rosh, he says that the Rabbeinu wrote there, we don't bless netilat yadayim when you go to the bathroom, unless he wants to pray. So therefore, it doesn't really help you here in this case. This is all the more so according to what I wrote over there. He says that he holds the Bet Yosef, even if you want to pray, you shouldn't bless. Netilat yadayim. Al netilat yadayim. Achar asiyat tzrachav, when you go to the bathroom. So the rule is, right, that we don't bless. That's the rule. Netilat yadayim. for the karpas. And also, we don't bless netilat yadayim when we go to the bathroom, right? Every time, just in the morning, because in the morning we just woke up, right? So we have to bless netilat yadayim. But in general, we don't bless netilat yadayim for using the bathroom. So what do we bless? We bless asher yatzar, right? That's what we. Okay, as you know. ומה שכתב, כי זהו שינוי שטובלין קודם סעודה, so he said that what he wrote, that this is the change that we make, that we dip, because we want the children to ask questions. כך פירשו רש"י ורשב"ם. That's what the Rashi Rashbam said, that this is the reason why we dip, to make everybody inquisitive, the children especially, right? מה נשתנה? ומה שכתב ואין צריך מהם כזית, and that which we said, right? You don't need to eat a kazait. Sham ahad Tanya gabe maror, right over there he says regarding what we learned regarding maror, achlu lechatzain yatsa, that if he ate it like half and half, 50-50, he fulfills obligation, even though he didn't eat it right in one shot, whatever. Katav Rosh, says the Rosh over there, mishum denbarech al achilat maror, because he blesses al achilat maror. Tzarich she'ochal kazait. You have to eat a kazait since you made the blessing al achilat maror. But tzarich she'ochal kazait then achilat befachot kazait, because the rule is, right, whatever you have to eat, the rule is you're supposed to eat kazait. אבל בירקות הראשונות, משמברך עליהם בורא פרי האדמה, but he says when we eat the karpas, right, and we bless בורא פרי האדמה, בעלמא אין מזכירים עליהם אכילה, so we don't, right, there's no rule of eating there. Meaning what? In terms of the concept of eating. אין צריך מהן כזית, so therefore you don't need a כזית. וכך כתב רשב"א בתשובה, so the Rashba says, דאין צריך שיעור דאינו בא אלא להכר. So he says also the Rashba, the reason why we don't need to eat a kazait of karpas is because it doesn't really have any recognition. What does that mean? So meaning what? That it's not really like important type of eating. It's not something which has any significance, this eating. So then why do we do it? As we said, right, the reason is because to make them inquisitive. That's the whole point. So therefore, the point here is not to eat. The point is, to make them ask questions. That's why you don't need a kazait. That's what he's saying, right? Okay, interesting. So then he says, "Aval Rambam katav shetzarich le'echol kazait." But Rambam says you have to eat kazait. V'katvu agot kazait ze lo yadati ma tivo. So it says, right, this rabbi, I don't know what this means, kazait here. Right? So you see, he also says, right, what we just mentioned, this rabbi. He says that I don't know what the point is here to eat a kazait, as we said, because the whole point is just to make people inquisitive. So then, why do you have to eat a kazait? What's the point? Umatzati b'tshuva, right? So he says, I found in a tshuva of Maharil, Borei nefashot rabot ika plukta. So right, regarding Borei nefashot, the final bracha, there is a machloket. Tzarich leomra achar tibur rishon. You have to say it after the first dip. Alken, therefore he says, ani ochel pachot mikazait. Therefore the proper thing to do, he says, what I do is I eat less than a kazait. This way you're not getting into a dispute. Lapuke nafshi miplukta. Apagav de Maimoni katav kazait. Right, so he says that even though this rabbi said you should eat a kazait, but he says, the rabbis argued with him about that. So it's machloket. Okay, Rashba katav, says Rashba, Sha'alta ma'u levarech b'tivur rishon. What's the din, right? Do we bless on the first karpas? Ve'acharav, and also afterwards, imachal kazait, if you eat a kazait. So the Rashba paskins over here. Tshuva, right? Kol she'achal kazait tzarich levarech acharav. So says the Rashba, if you ate a kazait, you have to bless. Yes. Shem birkat hamazon poteret ma she'achal kodem seuda. Because why is that? Because birkat hamazon doesn't absolve you from something that you ate before the seudah, before the meal. Veno masaya beseudah klal, and doesn't really help you with the seudah. והרי זה כדברים הבאים לאחר הסעודה. So it's considered to be like some kind of an appetizer, dessert, whatever. שלא מחמת הסעודה שטעונים ברכה לפניהם ולאחריהם. So it's not connected to the seudah, to the meal at all. And therefore you need the blessing before and after. Like it says in Brachot, Mem Aleph Amud Bet. בכל מקום, אינו ראוי לברך אחריו. So he says, but it's not proper to bless afterwards. There you go, right? Even he admits that's not proper to do that. Miyad al sheyochal maror, after he eats maror, she'elu berech al hayrakot, because if you bless on vegetables, afterwards, nimtza sheyitzarech levarech al maror, borei pri adama. So then you have to also bless on the maror, borei pri adama. Right? So, but now, since we ate the karpas, we don't have to do it again. So it absolves the maror as well. ולאכול מרור כדרך שהוא מברך על המצה שתיים, just like we bless on the matzah, 2 blessings, and ברכת הלחם פותרת את המרור. So the blessing of the matzah doesn't absolve the maror. אף על פי שקראו פרפרת הפת, even though they called it, right, it's like a side dish, salad, right, whatever. שאין הפת פותרת את הפרפרת, אלא הפרפרת שהיא באה ללפת את הפת. So it says, you know why that is? Because when it comes to side dishes, right, that go with a meal, usually we don't bless on those in a meal. But here we do bless on the maror. Why is that? Because it's not really, coming to accompany the meal, accompany the bread. Right? שאז היא פטורה מפני שהיא תפילה תפיל פת, אבל אחרת, שאינה באה מחמת הפת, but he says, since this stuff is not really coming to accompany the bread, אין הפת פוטרתה. So therefore, it says the bread doesn't really absolve, right, the blessing of the maror. ולאחר המרור מברך ברכה שלאחריו. So after the maror, it says, you bless, after blessing, הוא פוטר אותו ואת הירק שאכל בטיבול. So then you absolve that and also the vegetable that you ate when you dipped, right, the karpas. וכן נהגתי והנהגתי. So that's what the Rashba says, that's the way I accustom people to do, and myself as well. Okay, so we don't do everything like the Rashba here, what he says. We'll see in the Shulchan Aruch, right, what our custom is. Umash katav Rabbeinu b'shem Rabbeinu Tam. Now which the Rabbeinu, the Tur, said in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, shetivul zeh lo yeh b'charoset, right, that you shouldn't dip the karpas into charoset. Ken piresh Rashbam, that's what Rashbam says also. Beperek Arvei Pesachim over there. Kuf Yudal Amud Aleph. V'kak katav Tosot, that's what it says, Tosot Berosh, B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam, name Rabbeinu Tam. והגאות כתבו שהרם היה רגיל לעשות גם טיבול זה בחרוסת. But this rabbi says, right, that the Ram used to dip it into חרוסת, ואומר, מה שכתב רבנו תם, שאינם בחרוסת, היינו שאין צריך לחרוסת. And now he explains that, this rabbi, that which Rabbeinu Tam said you shouldn't do in charoset, that means you don't need charoset. אבל אם רוצה להרשות בידו, but if you want to do it, right, the option is in your hands, right, you can do. The ball's in your court. You can do whatever you want. מיהו בספר המצוות, but it says in ספר המצוות, כתב רבותינו שבצרפת אין נוהגים לעשות. So he says the French rabbis are not accustomed to do like this. טיבול זה בחרוסת, to dip it into חרוסת. כי אינו נזכר במשנה, because it's not mentioned in the משנה, עד טיבול שני, right, until the second dipping, right, which is the maror. וכן פירש הרבינו יחיאל, that's what this rabbi says, שטיבול ראשון הבא לעשותו בחרוסת, אינו אלא בנהג שטות. So he says, right, that if you're going to dip the karpas into charoset, that's a foolish custom. Okay. All right, there you go. ופסקו רבנו תם, אבל שאסור לעשות טיבול ראשון בחרוסת. So they pass in these rabbis that you're not allowed to make the first dip, right, of the karpas into charoset. Deikar mitzvah hi b'tivul sheni, because you're supposed to do that, right, with the maror. The maror. V'kodem ha-mitzvah en l'maleh kresot mecharoset. So it says before you do the mitzvah, you shouldn't eat the charoset because that'll spoil your appetite for afterwards. Ela yochalenu ba'et ha-mitzvah. You should eat it at the time of the mitzvah, l'te'avon, right, with appetite, with good appetite. Kemo matzah, like matzah. That's what it says. עד כאן השם של ספר התרומה. That's what it says in ספר התרומה. ואנו אין לנו אלא דברי הרם. So he says, right, that we pass like the Ram. He says, דהוא בתאה וידע דברי כולם. He was the final one, he says, and therefore he knew all the other opinions, right? But the truth is, right, that our custom is not like this. It's like Rabbeinu Tam, who says we dip it into vinegar and not charoset. Okay. ואיני יודע מה ראו לתפוס כדברי הרם, כיוון דכי מטבל בחומץ לכולי עלמא שפיר דמי. So he says, right, I don't know, it says Bet Yosef, right, he comments on this. I don't know why they want to go like the Ram. It says because when you write, because when you dip it into vinegar, it's okay according to everybody. So it's a more safer bet. Right? כולי עלמא שפיר דמי. ובטיבול דחרוסת חלוקים כמה גדולים. But it says when it comes to charoset, there's a dispute about that if you can do that or not. So why get into a dispute? Why get into machloket? Right, גדולים. וטיבול דחומץ עדיף. So therefore he says better to do in vinegar. וכך נוהגים המדקדקים לעשות טיבול זה. So he says that's the way people do, right? The people who are very, devout Jews, right? They dip it into chometz, right? They dip it into vinegar. Okay, there you go. Right, so according to this, what we see here, it seems like vinegar is the best bet, right? Even better than salt water, perhaps. Let's see, right? So he also says, Mordechai, right, that you should not do this with charoset. Rather, what you should do is you either use vinegar or wine. Says I also found that some do it with salt water, as we said, right? So, right, the best bet is what? Vinegar or salt water, right? That's the custom nowadays. Whatever makes you happy, one or the other. But it seems like vinegar is the best bet. Okay, interesting. Now what she wrote that if he doesn't have any other vegetables, you should not dip it into charoset, even if you're using romaine lettuce. That's what the Rosh says there. So as we said, right, that according to the Re, you're supposed to bless after blessing, after you dip it and eat the celery, right? And the Rashbam and Saich, but according to Rashbam, you don't bless. You don't need to bless. חלקו בטעם למה אינו מברך בורא פרי אדמה כשאוכל מרור כמו שכתב רבנו בסימן תע"ה דלרי שנפטר בברכת המוציא אם כן אכל הטיבול ראשון צריך לברך עם אכל כזית. So he says, right, that there's different opinions over here, and so how does it get right? How do we line them up over here, these opinions? So he says that since there's dispute regarding the reason why we don't bless Bor Pi Adama when he eats a maror, right? Like we said in the tour, because he's already, fulfilled the obligation when he blessed Hamotzi. And therefore you don't need it anymore. So it says, if so, after the first dip, you have to bless. If you eat a kazait, you have to bless. But according to Rashbam, that he says that right, you always fulfill your obligation by saying Bar Pi Adama on the karpas. Okay. So therefore, you should not bless after you eat the karpas, right? After blessing. Because otherwise you have to do Bar Pi Adama again when you do the maror. So he said, according to this, he says, the Torah should not have written that according to Rashbam, you don't need to bless. Because that implies that if he wants to, he could. It's like optional, Then okay, but it says it's not so. It says Bet Yosef. Because it would turn out that he's making a blessing which is in vain, basically. Then it will be forbidden. Ella, right? It says rather That's the way you should have written, right? What that was. According to Rashbam, you should not bless. Not that you don't need to bless, but you should not. So this rabbi says in the name of the Rashba, that we don't bless after after the celery, and that's the right custom, right? That's the halakha. So the halakha is that after we eat the celery, we don't bless borei nefashot after blessing, right? And that's why it's better to, as we said, right, to eat less than the kazait. This way, you're not getting into a different dispute about this. הורה לחזר אחר קרפס לטיבור ראשון שקוראים בלעז אפיו, right, whatever, okay. So he says, right, that which type of vegetable should you use for this? So, as we said, right, karpas, which is, celery, right? So try to use celery for this. Not like, some of the Ashkenazim who use carrots, or potatoes, right? That's not the best thing. The best thing is to use celery because that's really the authentic mitzvah, right? The custom, whatever. Kieno maror. So he says, why is that? Why is it better to use that? Because it's not really bitter, So it's not like something that you can use for maror. It's a different thing altogether. V'yesh semech belokeach karpas otiot samech perach שעבדו מצרים 60 ריבו. About right, so he says that there's also some kind of allusion here in the letters here, and that's why we use karpas, right? So he says because the samech over there, right? So that alludes to the the hard labor that the Egyptians imposed upon us. Okay, good. אבל בפרוטוסוליו וקורביל בלשון אשכנז היה מסופק שמא עולשין שהוא מן מרור לאחר שמילא קרסו ממרור בטיבור ראשון יברך על אכילת מרור. So he says, but don't use vegetables that can be used from maror. Why is that? Because then it turns out, right, that you already had maror before you ate the maror. So that's not going to be, the proper way to do the mitzvah. Because you already got a taste of it beforehand. So therefore, right, the proper thing to do is to use celery for the karpas. And then, as we said, right, for maror, use romaine lettuce. This way, this is the best way to do it. The authentic way. Okay. Good. So he says, right, that Pisheno karpas, ikach karti, right, says if you don't have karpas, if you don't have celery, so it says you can use leeks, right? Interesting. There you go. So that's number 2, right, in terms of the priority here. Number 1 is celery. Number 2, leeks, right, which reminds us of Passover, right? We eat that stuff. I'm sorry, not Passover. It reminds us of Rosh Hashanah. And then we eat leeks also in Rosh Hashanah. So it has a dual purpose, right? Whatever, this vegetable here. Okay. So good. So he says, right, that Bet Yosef, he comments on this. It seems like he didn't know what the Olshin was, right, which is endives. Petrozilla, right? So he says he thought that maybe endives, right, is parsley. He got those two mixed up, he says. Right, induvia, right? So endives, right? Induia, endives. You see the similarity in the words endives, induia. So that's endives, belaz, beno inyan le pitrozilla. So it says, right, don't get them mixed up. So what does that mean? Right? We have endives, which is maror. It's like, the second best maror. And we have petrozilla, right, which is parsley. And that is something which is like a substitute for karpas, just in case you don't have karpas, right? Something like that. So that's the story there, right? Okay, good. We're getting a nice, nice education over here regarding all these vegetables. Okay, good. So that's right. So that's where we conclude the issue of the karpas. Hope you guys know, right? What to do. Okay, so now we get into the issue of the matzah, right? Taking the middle matzah and then cutting it into half, breaking it into half. So let's see what the Torah says regarding that. So says the Torah, as we said, right? What you do is you have 3 matzot on the table, right? For your seder, right? Your shmura matzah, right? Don't bring that boxy stuff, right? The box matzah for this, right? This is not the box, not the square stuff, right? The round ones, the shmura matzah you need for this. So you have 3 of them. So what you do is, right? You take the middle one and you cut it into 2 pieces. Right? You don't use a knife, just like with your hands. You just separate it into 2 pieces, and 1 big piece and 1 small piece. Right? That's the way it turns out to be. So what you do is, right, that one half of that matzah, you give it to one of the people who are there, and they keep it for the afikoman, right? Which we're going to talk about later on. That's at the end of the meal. So that's reserved for the afikoman. ונותנים אותה תחת המפה זכר למשרתם לצורות בסמלותם וחציה השני. So he says, where do you put the afikoman, right? There's all kinds of customs, by the way. Some people hide it and all kinds of stuff. But he says, right, that the Torah doesn't say to hide it. Well, kind of, whatever. Right? He says that you should put it under the tablecloth, right? That's the custom. That's how we store it up until the time that we need it, right? For later on, when we eat the afikoman. Okay, good. So then, the other half, right? What do you do with the other half? The חצי השני ישים בין השלמות כדי שיפגע בשלמות תחילה. So he says, then what you do is the other half, right? You put it between the 2 complete matzot, in between. So it's like sort of a sandwich, You have the complete one on the bottom and on the top, and in the middle you have the broken one. That's how it is. Okay, good. So why do we do it that way? Because when we make the blessing for the matzah to eat it, we want to first have like a complete one, right? That's going to be the more respectable way of blessing, right? Usually, when you bless on bread, right, the preferred way is to use like a complete loaf if you have one, It's preferred. Especially on Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? That is already, not only preferred, it's obligation. So that's what we want to do. כשיבוא לברך ברכת המוציא, שממנה יש לו לבצוע בגביע הקרע שבה המצות ואמר, right? So he says, so then what you do is when you make hamotzi to eat the matzah later on, after we read half the Haggadah, or the Haggadah, right? We read the Haggadah after we read it. יש לו לבצוע בגביע הקרע. So then, right, what you do is you break from both of them, right? First, you break from the complete one, and then you break also from the other one.
Where did the custom of I just remember your daughter making us do the whole thing with the tearing it into the shape of a dalet and a yod.
Like this is Kabbalistic thing.
That's Kabbalistic. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's good to keep that. It's good. Right? So like you have two letters that you form. Right? One you form like one vav and one dalid. So the dalid is bigger than the vav, right? So that's that's what you're talking about.
Is it a dalet or a vav? I mean, I'm sorry, is it a
The
vav?
big one is a dalid and the small one is a vav.
Yeah, is it a vav or is it a yod?
Oh, it's a vav. It's a vav. Because the yud is like small.
Right? So if you had never mind, forget it.
The vav is like long, relatively speaking, right?
Sorry. Never
And
mind.
yud is like a tiny one, tiny one.
I'm aware. Never mind. I'll just forget it. Forget it.
So that's the story, right? Okay. All right, that's interesting. Okay. No, the reason why I laughed is because I thought like you had some kind of a source for that it should be a yud. This I never heard before. Okay, I was like a little surprised there. Okay, but the truth is, if I remember correctly, if my memory serves me right, it's supposed to be a dalet and a vav. Okay. So yeah, let's go on. Good. Okay, so I guess we can look at the Bet Yosef if we can finish it. I don't want to keep you guys too long. Yeah, so it says here, Kachatav Rosh, it comes from the Rosh, this whole thing, right? The Mordechai and the Mordechai, Perek Erbe Psachim, the Kachatav Agot Maimon. So there's several sources that bring this whole thing, right? Of breaking the middle matzah and all this thing. כתב רבינו מאיר, דלא כספר מצוות, ורוקח שפירושו לבצוע הראשונה, right? So again, right, so there are some who say you should break the top one, but that's not the custom. Okay, we break the middle one, as we said, right? נותנים אותה תחת המפה, זכר למשארותם. Then we said, right, put it under the handkerchief, the tablecloth. וכך כתב הרוקח, כתב הכל בו, המנהג לחלקה, קודם שיקרא אגדה, כדי שיאמר עליה הלחמניה, right? So he says, the custom is to do this before you read the Haggadah, to, divide it up into two pieces, right? In order that we should say, right, that this is the bread of poverty, so meaning what? That we're not eating a complete loaf, just, half, which is like, more like for poor people. So just like poor people eat, like not complete loaves, right? Sliced bread. So we also, right? ויש שאומרים שהוא כדי שיראו התינוקות וישאלו מפניהם מה אנו מטמינים המצה, right? So also another reason why we do this is because the children should ask, right? Why are we hiding the matzah? What's going on with that? Right? Another makes them also inquisitive, this whole thing. ועדיין לא אכלנו, and we haven't eaten yet, right? So what are we doing? We're hiding the matzah, right? What are we storing it up for? ויש אומרים כדי שלא יראו ויאכלו אותה תוך הסעודה. And some say, right, the reason why we put it under the tablecloth is because people shouldn't eat it, right? Because we have to save that for later on, for the afikoman. בשוגג, ולא יהיה לו עוד מצה בשמורת בכורה נכונה. So then there won't be any matzah shmura left for the afikoman, and that's not good, right? We want to use matzah shmura for afikoman. לפיכך, מצניעים אותה, that's why we hide it, right? So this way nobody can snatch it and eat it, while we're not looking, There are some people who are, very, very tricky. You know what that they like to eat. When you look away, they eat and then it's gone. Okay. לפיכך מצניעין אותה, right. חצי הישים בין שתי השנים. As we said, right, we put it in between the two complete ones. וכך כתב הראש פרק מהרבה פסחים. So it says in the Rosh. Okay, so I guess we'll stop here. We still have a way to go here to finish this chapter. So Bezat Hashem, I don't think we'll do it tonight. We'll continue tomorrow, God willing, Bezat Hashem. And so thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll continue with our Haggadah, Seder, right? All that good stuff. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
God bless. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless. All the best.